The wind moved slowly across the valley, carrying with it the scent of ash, dust, and the lingering memory of death. The sky was an iron-gray canvas, heavy with clouds that refused to cry. Below, the ground was scarred, trenches dug in desperation, broken barricades abandoned in haste, and scattered remnants of armor that had once protected men who no longer breathed. It was a place where hope had thinned, where courage had been tested, and where fate had drawn its final line in the dirt. This was where Captain Rafik and his battalion stood, knowing that within a few hours the earth beneath their feet would drink their blood. They had been fighting for weeks, pushed from ridge to ridge, valley to valley, as the enemy tightened its relentless grip. Reinforcements promised many times had never arrived, supplies dwindled, ammunition ran low. And morale had cracked like dry wood, yet Rafik's men remained, not because orders forced them, but because abandoning this ground meant abandoning the villages behind them, homes, families, fields, memories. Surrender would mean the enemy would sweep through, burning everything these men had ever lived for. So they chose to stay, to fight, to stand until the last arrow, the last breath, the last heartbeat. Night fell slowly, pulling a cold silence across the camp. Small fires flickered, not for warmth but for light. Men sat quietly, sharpening blades already dulled by war. Some prayed softly, voices trembling like fragile flames. Others stared into the darkness, as if trying to see the shape of the coming dawn. Captain Rafik walked among them, not as a commander giving orders, but as a brother placing a hand on each shoulder, sharing in their fear and their resolve. He paused near a young soldier, barely old enough to grow a full beard, who sat gripping his spear tightly. The boy looked up at him with wide, unsteady eyes. "Captain, will they really come tonight?" he asked. Rafik nodded slowly. "Yes," he answered quietly, "and when they do, we will meet them like men who know their worth." The boy swallowed hard, then nodded, finding strength in the certainty of his captain's voice. Rafik walked on, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon him like a cloak soaked in rain. He knew the numbers, he knew the odds, but he also knew something the enemy did not. These men would not break. As midnight approached, a low thunder rolled across the hills, but it was not the sky. It was footsteps, hundreds, then thousands, an army moving like a dark tide across the earth. Torches glowed atop the ridges, forming a river of fire winding down the slopes. The glow illuminated steel helmets, banners stretched in the wind, the sharp glint of spears raised in perfect formation. The enemy was coming, and they were ready to erase whatever remained of Rafik's battalion. The small group of defenders gathered near the broken wall that served as their final line. Their shields were dented, their weapons worn, their bodies tired, but their eyes held a fierce, unbreakable determination. Rafik stood in front of them, silhouetted by the dim flames behind him. He raised his sword slowly, letting the silence stretch long enough to bind them together. "Brothers," he said, voice steady and deep, "tonight we are not fighting for medals or glory. We are not fighting for commanders far away who will never know our names. We fight for the children who sleep behind these hills, for the mothers and fathers who wait for morning, for the fields that grew our bread, for the homes that shaped our lives. If we fall tonight, we fall protecting everything we have ever loved. Let the enemy come, let them try to break us, for as long as we stand together, this ground will never belong to them." The first horn sounded from the enemy lines, a deep, haunting cry that echoed across the valley like the roar of a beast. A second horn answered, then a third, and the river of fire began to surge forward. The first clash shook the air with violent force. Arrows rained down from the sky, slicing through the night like falling stars. Shields rose, but not all in time. Men cried out as the arrows sunk deep. The front lines braced themselves as the enemy warriors charged with terrifying speed. When they collided, the sound was like steel screaming against steel. Rafik fought at the front, his sword flashing in arcs of silver. He moved with the desperation of a man who refused to die quietly. Every swing carried purpose, every step carried fury. Beside him, his men stood shoulder to shoulder, pushing back the enemy with everything they had. The ground shook beneath their feet, sparks flew, blood splattered across armor already stained red, but the enemy did not stop. When one wave fell, another surged forward, and another. Their numbers were endless. Rafik saw his men fall one by one, friends he had trained with, marched with, laughed with. Their bodies formed a wall stronger than any stone barrier he could have built. Still he fought on, refusing to let grief weaken his arm. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The battalion's line bent, cracked, but did not break. Exhausted soldiers leaned on shields heavy with dents. Wounded men stumbled back into position, unwilling to leave their brothers behind. The night grew thick with smoke, blood, and the metallic stench of war. Just when the defenders felt their strength fading, a roar erupted from the east, foreign, sharp, powerful. Rafik turned just in time to see lights moving along the horizon. Not enemy torches, but reinforcements. At last, after countless hours of despair, help had come. Fresh troops stormed into the battlefield with renewed energy, slamming into the enemy's flank. The surprised invaders staggered, their formation breaking. Rafik saw the shift instantly. Hope, long buried beneath exhaustion and loss, flared alive inside him. He lifted his sword high and shouted, "Forward, for those who fell, for those who live." His remaining men surged behind him with a final burst of strength. Together, they pushed through the weakened enemy lines, driving them back step by step. The enemy, overwhelmed and disoriented, began to retreat, first in groups, then in waves, until finally the dark tide broke completely. They fled into the hills, their torches flickering smaller and smaller until they vanished into the shadows from which they came. Silence settled over the battlefield, thick and heavy. The reinforcements cheered in victory, but Rafik did not. Instead, he walked slowly among the fallen bodies of his men. Kneeling by each one, he closed their eyes with a gentle hand. His heart felt like shattered stone, proud, broken, and burdened with the weight of survival. He whispered, "Your names will not fade, your courage will not be forgotten. This land stands because of you." As dawn finally touched the valley, painting the world in soft shades of gold and red, Rafik looked out at the hills his men had died to protect. The rising sun made the battlefield glow, not with death, but with honor. The villages behind him would wake to peace. Children would laugh, families would gather, life would continue, and it would continue because a handful of warriors had refused to surrender. Their last stand did not become a page in a book or a carving on a monument. It became something deeper, etched into the soil, carried in the wind, spoken in quiet gratitude by those who would never know how close they came to darkness. A battle written in blood, carried forever by the memories of those who survived because brave souls had stood their ground.